All right, let's try something. For just a minute, forget everything you think you know about political leadership. The big speeches, the charisma, all of that. Today, we're going to look at the hidden architecture of power. Specifically, how an opposition is actually built. And you're about to see it as a completely different game with its own set of rules.
And to really get our heads around this, we're going to look at a puzzle that sits right at the heart of modern Indian politics, the role of Rahul Gandhi. You have to wonder, why does he stay so central to the opposition when the usual explanations, campaign style or speeches, they just don't seem to tell the whole story?
So here it is, the core question we're tackling today. Why does a leader who really defies that traditional mold of a dominant, authoritative figure remain so crucial to the political equation? Well, the answer, as we're about to see, isn't really found in his personality. It's found in the political math.
To solve this puzzle, we have to shift our focus. We need to stop looking at the player and start looking at the game board itself. And it turns out, in national politics, there are actually two very different games being played at the same time, and each one has its own path to victory.
Okay, so this is really the core framework for our whole analysis. The way a ruling party gets and holds power versus how an opposition party tries to get it, they're not just different. They require almost opposite strategies and, frankly, opposite skills.
You want to understand opposition politics? You have to get this one concept: aggregation. This isn't about crushing your rivals, it's about collecting allies. Think of it like this. It's less about building a fortress and more about putting up a giant kind of wobbly tent and trying to get a whole bunch of different, often competing groups to huddle underneath it.
And right here, the contrast just becomes crystal clear. A ruling party's playbook is all about dominance, projecting clarity through one single strong leader. But for the opposition, the goal is aggregation. It's about accommodating the needs of many different parties. These are just two fundamentally different missions.
And this is where things get really interesting, because it completely flips what we think leadership is all about. The key to leading an opposition isn't a game of addition, inspiring the most people. It's actually a game of subtraction, offending the fewest potential partners. So the most valuable player isn't the most charismatic one, it's the one who causes the least amount of friction.
All right, so if the name of the game is offend the fewest, let's apply that idea. Let's take a look at these specific structural assets that help explain Rahul Gandhi's persistent relevance in this whole opposition landscape. So the source material really boils it down to three big things. First, his nationwide visibility. In a vast country, he's a known quantity pretty much everywhere, and that's a huge asset. Second, his acceptability to a wide range of potential allies, which is, of course, crucial for building that coalition tent. And third, and this is a big one, the simple fact that there isn't a clear alternative who has both of those assets.
Let's dig into that first point a little. Think about it. Pan-India visibility in a country as diverse as India is a massive logistical advantage. It kind of lowers the transaction cost of building a coalition. You don't need to do introductions, which makes the really hard work of negotiation just a little bit easier. And that leads right into the second point, which is absolutely critical if you're a regional party leader. Having a central figure who isn't a threat to your own home base is essential. And this is where just being acceptable or even just being tolerated becomes a massive strategic asset. You don't need to be loved by your partners, you just need to be someone they can work with without them feeling like you're going to steal their spotlight.
But hey, to get the full picture, we have to look at the other side of the coin, right? There are also structural liabilities that shape the political reality, and these are just as important to understand.
And what's really interesting here is that the primary concern isn't necessarily about a specific policy or ideology. Instead, for really powerful groups, we're talking markets, investors, the state bureaucracy, the biggest fear is just unpredictability. They value certainty and a clear, proven chain of command above pretty much anything else.
And that fear comes from what the source calls the executive confidence gap. See, a long career in opposition politics makes you really good at campaigning and critiquing, but it doesn't build a public track record in large-scale administration, like running a state government, which is often seen as the key benchmark for being ready for the top job.
And this perceived gap, whether it's real or not, creates real hesitation among some pretty key groups. The bureaucracy, which actually has to implement policy, the markets, which have to price risk, and parts of the middle class, who often prioritize stability, they all look for that proven record of governance.
Okay, so we've looked at the assets for a game of aggregation and the liabilities for a game of executive dominance. Now let's bring it all together to understand this idea of a situational leader.
So here's the crucial point. When you map all of these attributes out, you get this really distinct profile. Unproven on governance competence, sure, but very strong on coalition acceptability and carrying a low risk of polarizing potential allies. This profile explains both his resilience as an opposition anchor and the perceived ceiling he faces in a head-to-head contest for dominance.
And this brings us to the core thesis of this entire analysis. The path to power here isn't some single grand highway paved by overwhelming popular demand. It's more like a narrow, winding road that only opens up when the political arithmetic lines up just right.
So this creates a very specific four-step scenario. It requires the ruling party to fall short of a majority. Then, the opposition numbers have to add up. And, critically, powerful regional parties have to decide they need a consensus candidate who won't overshadow them. The opportunity is entirely dependent on the circumstances.
And you know, this gets to a fundamental truth about coalition-era politics. When voters deliver a fractured, messy result, the system isn't looking for a hero to take command, it's looking for a compromise that can hold the room together. In situations like these, leaders are forged through negotiation, not just through elections.
So, this leaves us with a really big question, especially for our increasingly fragmented world. What's ultimately more valuable? A leader who commands with absolute clarity, or one who can build a compromise from a bunch of competing interests? The answer to that? Well, it might just define the future of leadership itself.